entire street went still when 3 black SUVs entered Sandra's dusty compound on the outskirts of Lagos. Their engines idled, doors remained closed, and neighbors leaned against their gates, whispering quietly. Sandra stood barefoot on the broken step of her small house, her heart pounding. Next to her, the blind beggar she had brought home just minutes earlier did something unexpected. He stood upright, removed his dark glasses, and slipped off the torn cloth draped over his shoulders. Underneath was a clean white shirt and a finely tailored jacket. The man everyone had ignored in the marketplace now appeared confident and dignified. Sandra's lips parted, but no words came. The man met her gaze with gentle eyes. "Sandra," he said calmly, "you don't know who I truly am." The SUV stayed silent until one driver stepped out and lifted a phone to his ear. Sandra's legs weakened. Earlier that morning, the rising sun heated the red soil, shining over rows of worn rooftops. Zinc sheets on roadside shops glimmered, buses blared, and hawkers shouted, "Pure water, ground nuts, bread." Sandra walked quickly, head lowered, her stomach empty. At 18, her body was frail from too many days like this. She was on her way to the market to carry goods for others, the only way she could afford food. She repeated her mother's words, in her mind, words that had guided her since the accident that had taken both her parents. Kindness always finds its way back. Never let your heart close. She touched the faded strap of her small bag, inside which was her most precious possession, a folded photograph of her and her parents in front of this same house, all 3 smiling brightly. At a corner near the pepper stalls, she noticed him. An elderly man sat by the gutter, thin and weary. His garment was torn at the shoulder, dark glasses covered his eyes, and a walking stick lay across his knees. His lips were cracked and he held out a trembling hand, palm open, asking for help. People passed as if he were part of the road. "Move aside," a man with a wheelbarrow muttered, brushing past. 2 schoolboys laughed and rushed on. A tomato seller shook her head. "So many problems, who can help who?" Sandra slowed while the crowd pushed forward. The old man tilted his head toward the sound of footsteps, as though listening for kindness to reach him. Sandra's chest tightened. She looked at the coins in her bag. Too little for bread, too little for anything. She knelt down. "Good morning, sir," she said softly. "Do you need water?" His lips moved. "Water," he whispered. Sandra hurried to the nearest stall and pleaded for a small sachet. The woman sighed but handed her one. "Here, but this is the last I can spare today." "Thank you," Sandra said, rushing back. She tore the edge and held it for the old man. He drank slowly, as if calming a fire within. When finished, he exhaled deeply and rested the empty sachet in his palm. "Thank you, my daughter," he said. His voice was calm and steady. "My name is Anderson." "Sandra," she replied. "I live close by." He turned his head toward the sound of her voice. "I have nowhere to go. I cannot see the road, and there is no one to guide me. Will you take me in as a father?" His head lowered as he spoke. "I will not be a burden. I only need a corner to rest, even for one night." Sandra's breath caught. She thought of taking him in. She owned little, a mat, an old fan that worked only when there was power, no food, and no money. Her plan for the day was simple: carry baskets until her body ached, then buy rice and vegetables. A woman passing with yams stopped and stared. "Child," she said, "use your sense. Everyone is hungry. You cannot save the world." Sandra looked up. "I know," she answered softly, "but I can help one person." The woman shook her head and walked away. The market buzzed with noise. A bus released smoke. The old man's hand hovered in the air, trembling like a question. Sandra stood, placed her shoulder under his arm and lifted him. He was lighter than she expected. She placed his hand on her shoulder and took his walking stick. "Sir, I'll take you to my house first. You can rest there." They moved slowly through the crowd. People glanced and then turned away. A boy muttered, "Trouble." Still, Sandra kept walking. The ground burned under her feet, but she did not stop. At the edge of the settlement, the houses grew fewer, tall grasses rising along the sandy path. Behind a leaning fence stood her small house, old but clean. She opened the gate and pushed the door with her hip. Inside, the living room held only a fan, a plastic chair, and a thin mat on the floor. Sunlight fell across the cracked tiles. Sandra guided the man to the mat. He sat with a quiet sigh. "I'll bring you water," she said. She filled a cup from her blue container and handed it with both hands. He drank, and the lines on his face softened. "Rest here," Sandra told him, placing the stick within reach. "Please, sir, I need to return to the market. I carry loads to earn money. I'll buy food for us on my way back." He lifted his head. "Us?" "Yes," she replied, surprised by the certainty in her voice. "You and me." He was silent for a moment, then asked, "Where are your parents?" Sandra's throat tightened. She sat on the floor leaning against the wall. "They're gone. A car crashed last year and there was fire. The neighbors came too late. I was 17, now I'm 18, I live alone." The man's lips moved as though to say sorry, but no words came. He turned his face toward her, as if looking past the glasses. "You said you're alone," he murmured, "yet you still took me in." "My mother taught me something," Sandra said, pressing her hand against the floor to steady herself. "Even if no one helps you, don't turn away from the help you can give. I try to live by that even when I'm hungry." A faint smile touched the man's lips. He turned his hand and found hers on the floor. His fingers were warm and steady. "Sandra," he said, "you have a strong heart." She rose. "I must go before the sun gets hotter. I'll be back with food." She tucked a family photo from her bag into a crack in the wall where she always kept it safe, then reached for the door. "Wait," the man said. Sandra paused. His chin lifted, his back straightened, and then he did something that froze time. He stood up. He removed the dark glasses. He pulled off the torn shirt. Beneath it, his clothes were neat and well pressed. He looked taller, younger, and familiar. Sandra blinked, struggling to understand. I don't understand," she whispered. The man's eyes were clear and bright. For the first time, he looked at her fully. "I am not blind, Sandra," he said gently. "My name is Chief Donald Anderson. I am the CEO of the Donald Group." Sandra felt the room spin. She had seen his face on television, heard his name on billboards and buses, and here he was, sitting on her mat. A billionaire. He lifted his phone and dialed. "Come to this address," he said. His voice was no longer weak. It was the commanding tone of a man used to being obeyed. "Bring the cars," he said, ending the call before turning back to Sandra. "I came here in disguise today. I wanted to see how people treat a man without wealth or status," he explained. "At the market, people passed me by without a glance, but you saw me." Sandra tried to respond, but only a dry sound left her throat. She touched the wall for balance. "Don't be afraid," Chief Anderson said calmly. "I will not harm you. You welcomed me into your home when you had almost nothing. Because of that, I will open my own doors to you." Engines rumbled outside. Sandra stepped to the door and peered through the crack. 3 black SUVs pulled up in front of her fence, dust floating in the sunlight like scattered stars. Neighbors gathered quickly, pointing with wide eyes. Chief Anderson's gaze swept across her small room. He noticed the cracked wall where Sandra had tucked a family photo, the carefully swept floor, the neat stack of school books, and the single plastic chair polished from constant cleaning. He nodded slightly as if these details told him a truth he valued. A driver in a clean suit opened the gate. "Sir," he called. Chief Anderson looked at Sandra. "Gather the things that matter most to you," he said. "We are leaving." Sandra stared at him. "Leaving? To where?" Her heart swelled with both fear and hope. She went to the wall, pulled out the folded family photo, and clutched it to her chest. Her eyes burned with tears as she looked at her books, then at the mat, then at the bright line of sunlight across the floor like a path into another life. "Now?" she asked in a small voice. "Now," Chief Anderson replied with a gentle smile. The first SUV door opened with a click. Neighbors pressed closer. Sandra took a breath and reached for her books with trembling hands when a sudden heavy knock shook the doorframe. Boom, boom, boom. A rough voice shouted from outside, "Open up! Where did these cars come from?" The pounding echoed through, the small house making the walls tremble. Neighbors gasped. Some whispered, "Police never come." Others muttered, "This girl has gotten into trouble." Sandra froze, clutching her photo to her chest. Her eyes darted to Chief Anderson, who now stood tall in his fine suit, his calm presence like a shield. He raised one hand, signaling her not to panic, but Sandra's stomach tightened. Who was at the door? Did they think she had stolen something? Would they drag her away? The voice barked again. "Open this door now. Who are you hiding? Where did these rich men's cars come from?" Sandra's breath caught. She tried to answer, but no words came. Neighbors leaned against the shaky fence, stretching their necks to see. Children squealed with excitement, pointing at the SUVs shining under the hot Lagos sun. With surprising force, Chief Anderson pulled the door open. The wooden frame groaned as it swung wide. Outside stood 3 men, 2 in dusty shirts and slippers, 1 in a heavy brown jacket despite the heat. Their eyes moved from the SUVs to Sandra's small house, suspicion etched on their faces. "What's going on here?" the man in the jacket demanded, sweat streaking his forehead. "This girl is just a poor orphan. How can she suddenly bring these big men here? Something isn't right." Sandra's heart sank. His words stung because they were true. She was poor alone, and yet cars worth more than anything she could dream of stood outside her home. The crowd's murmurs grew louder, some nodding, others frowning. But Chief Anderson stepped forward, his voice deep and commanding. "Gentlemen, lower your tone. These cars are mine." The men blinked in disbelief. One squinted at him, then suddenly his eyes widened. "Wait, isn't this—" he stammered. "Yes," Chief Anderson said firmly, cutting him off. "I am Chief Donald Anderson, CEO of the Donald Group. These cars belong to me." And this young woman, he placed a gentle hand on Sandra's shoulder, was with him. Gasps spread through the air. Quiet whispers quickly turned into restless chatter. Some neighbors covered their mouths in disbelief, while others stepped back, ashamed for having judged Sandra so quickly. The men who had come earlier shifted uneasily, their boldness fading. Sandra looked up at Chief Anderson, her chest rising and falling rapidly. She could hardly believe it, a billionaire standing in her small home, defending her in front of those who once ignored her. Anderson's driver pulled the SUV door wider and called, "Sir, it's ready." Turning to Sandra, Anderson's eyes softened again. "Gather your things, my daughter. It is time to leave this place." Sandra's hands trembled as she clutched her books and family photo tightly. She glanced back once more at her home, the peeling paint, the crooked roof, the worn mat on the floor. Memories of her parents filled her eyes with tears. It was the only home she had ever known, yet deep inside she felt it was time to step into a life she never imagined. She took one step toward the car, when suddenly, a voice from the crowd shouted, "Sandra, don't go with them. You don't know who they really are." The words froze her mid-step. Her legs stiffened as the warning echoed across the dusty compound. All eyes turned to the speaker, a tall, middle-aged man in a faded blue shirt and trousers standing at the edge of the crowd. His voice carried urgency. "Don't trust them, Sandra. They'll deceive you. They'll use you." Murmurs rippled through the neighbors. Some nodded in agreement, while others whispered doubtfully, "But he said he's Chief Anderson." Sandra's chest tightened. The man was Mr. Ade, her father's old friend, the only neighbor who had sometimes given her leftover food when she was starving. She had always respected him. His sudden warning cut through her fragile hope like a knife. Her grip on the family photo shook as she glanced between Mr. Ade and the tall man in her living room. No longer a beggar, but Chief Anderson in a suit far too fine for her modest house. Confusion weighed heavily on her heart. Chief Anderson's gaze remained steady, He stepped forward, his voice calm yet commanding. My daughter, fear can blind men as much as darkness. That warning comes from doubt, not truth. But I will prove who I am. He pulled a sleek leather wallet from his pocket and revealed a gold-embossed card, extending it toward Mr. Aday. Here's my business card. Verify it if you wish. The driver by the SUVs raised his voice for all to hear. This is Chief Donald Anderson, Lagos Abuja, Port Harcourt. Everyone knows his name. He is no imposter. Still, suspicion lingered. Mr. Aday shook his head and stepped closer. Sandra, listen. You're just a girl. They may promise you the world, but one day you could vanish and no one would know what happened. Stay here where it's safe. Tears burned Sandra's eyes. Safe? She thought of the nights she slept on a hard mat, hungry and in pain. She thought of her parents' voices now gone forever. She remembered carrying heavy loads in the market just to buy a little food. Was this safety, or was it a slow, silent death? Chief Anderson's voice lowered, gentle but firm. Sandra, you gave me water when no one else would. You opened your door to me when you had nothing. I will never betray that trust. But the choice is yours alone. No one will force you. The crowd leaned closer, silent now. Even the children hushed. Sandra wiped her tears and turned to Mr. Aday. Uncle, she whispered. When my parents died, no one came to help me. I begged, but people turned away. Today, someone finally saw me. Her voice wavered, but she lifted her chin. I cannot let fear keep me in this pain. She held her books and photo tighter, then walked slowly toward the SUV. Neighbors gasped as the door clicked open. But just as Sandra bent to step inside, a siren blared in the distance, growing louder. Police cars raced toward the compound. The shrill sirens sliced through the air, growing louder each second. Neighbors scattered in all directions, some retreating. Behind fences, others edging closer to watch. Children clung to their mothers, their cries sharp and fearful. Sandra froze at the SUV door, her hand gripping the handle as her heartbeat quickened. 2 police trucks screeched to a halt outside the compound. Dust filled the air as 4 officers leapt down, their boots striking the ground with force. Rifles hung from their shoulders, and suspicion hardened their faces. Who owns these vehicles? The lead officer demanded, pointing toward the polished SUVs lined up inside Sandra's compound. Sandra's knees weakened. She hugged her books and a family photo tightly to her chest, unable to form words. What if they think I stole them? What if they arrest me? Fear pressed down on her, but before she could collapse under its weight, Chief Anderson stepped forward with composure. His suit caught the sunlight, and his voice carried calm authority. The vehicles belong to me. The officer narrowed his eyes. And you are? Anderson slipped a hand into his pocket and produced an ID card in a glass case. He handed it over without hesitation. The officer studied it, his brow furrowing before lifting in surprise. He whispered to his men, then looked back. Chief Donald Anderson, he muttered. CEO of the Donald Group. Gasps rippled through the crowd. Neighbors covered their mouths, whispered, and leaned closer in awe. The officer's suspicion eased, but his questions weren't over. He turned to Sandra. And this girl? Why is she here? Why stop at her house? Sandra's lips parted, but no sound came. How could she explain that she had taken in a blind beggar who later revealed himself to be a billionaire? Her throat tightened. Before she could respond, Chief Anderson spoke firmly. This young woman is my daughter now. She found me when no one else would. She gave me water when the world turned away. From today, she is under my protection. The officers exchanged stunned glances. The crowd erupted again, some voices full of disbelief, others heavy with wonder. A few neighbors who once mocked Sandra now lowered their eyes in shame. Others simply stared at her, shocked that the orphan girl they ignored had been chosen by a billionaire. The officer returned the ID with a respectful nod. Forgive us, sir. We had to act quickly when we noticed unusual movement here. I trust you understand?" "I do," Anderson replied evenly. Then he turned to Sandra, his voice softening. "It's time to go." Sandra's hands trembled as she climbed into the SUV. The leather seat felt foreign beneath her thin frame, so different from the rough mat she had slept on for months. She looked back at the only home she had ever known. The cracked walls, the crooked roof, the leaning gate. Her throat tightened as the convoy began to roll forward. Neighbors chased after the vehicles, waving and shouting. Sandra pressed her forehead against the glass, silent tears running down her cheeks. She didn't know if she was leaving behind her suffering or the last piece of her parents. Just as the SUVs turned onto the main road, her old cracked phone buzzed with an unknown number. She hesitated, then answered. A deep voice whispered, "Sandra, don't trust him, he's hiding something." Her heart stopped. The car's hum filled the silence, but those words echoed in her mind. Don't trust him. He's hiding something. Her hands shook. She glanced at Chief Anderson, seated beside her, calm and focused on the road. He seemed unaware of the storm building inside her. Should she tell him? Or stay silent? The voice returned, low and urgent. "You don't know the full story. Be careful. He is not who he says he is." Then the line went dead. Sandra clutched the phone, her pulse racing. She wanted to believe Anderson. He had defended her, lifted her from humiliation, and offered her a new life. But what if the caller was right? What if she was stepping into another trap? The convoy sped through Lagos traffic until the landscape shifted. Soon tall iron gates swung open, revealing a vast mansion framed by palm trees and fountains. Sandra gasped. She had never witnessed such elegance. Marble pillars rose like towers, glass windows gleamed, and the lawn appeared so perfect it seemed every blade of grass was trimmed by hand. "Welcome to your new home," Chief Anderson said, finally turning toward her with a calm smile. Sandra's throat tightened. Her mind drifted to her parents, the accident, and the lonely nights in her small house. This place looked unreal, yet the voice from the phone still echoed in her head, stirring doubt. Inside, the mansion was even more striking. Crystal chandeliers hung above, gold-framed paintings lined the walls, and a staircase curved upward like something from a film. Sandra walked slowly, eyes wide, holding her books and photos tightly as if they could keep her grounded. Chief Anderson guided her to a chair. "Sandra," he said softly, "your suffering ends today. From this moment on, you are my daughter. I will provide for your education, your future, everything you need." Tears welled in her eyes. "But why me?" she whispered. "Why would a man like you choose me?" He leaned closer, his eyes heavy with emotion. "Because you remind me of someone I lost. Years ago, my wife and daughter died in a plane crash. Since then, my home has been silent, my heart empty. But today, in that market, you showed me something I thought was gone. Compassion. You reminded me of the family I believed I would never feel again." Sandra's lips parted. She longed to believe him, to trust the warmth of his words. Yet the memory of that mysterious call pressed heavily on her chest. Was there more to his story? Before she could reply, a maid rushed in, her face pale. She leaned toward Chief Anderson and whispered something quickly. His expression darkened, his jaw clenched. "What is it?" Sandra asked, her voice trembling. "Chief," Anderson hesitated, then turned to her with troubled eyes. "Sandra, someone is trying to destroy me, and it may already be too late. If you enjoyed this story, remember to like, comment, share, and subscribe to our channel for more engaging stories."